Hey everybody, TacticAngel here, back on World Warships Legends. We're playing on a PlayStation, and today we're talking about the new campaign premium Tier 7 French Battleship Champagne. For this review, we'll actually start with something like history. I'll give you my thoughts on the ship, discuss commanders, run down the stats, and then we'll finish off with some gameplay. If you do want to skip around it all though, please check out the chapters I've set up for this video. For history, there's not really much to say here. In reality, there were 4 ships planned for the Richelieu class, and we've already got most of those in the game. Richelieu, Jean Bart, and in spite of its considerable differences, actually the Gascon is typically considered in the same class. The Richelieu was the only ship finished in the World War II timeframe. Jean Bart was launched prematurely, haphazardly armed with some AA, 1 turret, and some armor that included poured concrete. She took a bunch of damage at Casablanca and sat out basically the rest of the war. She officially entered service in 1955. Gascon was never laid down at all, and the remaining ship in the class was to be named Clemenceau. And at least her hull was started just hours after the Richelieu was launched, because the French had a sneaking suspicion that their neighbors might be up to no good. But the ship that you're looking at right now is not the Clemenceau. What you are looking at is something more of a what-if design than a design that was ever seriously considered to go into production. In any case, this design assumes a few things: that the French continued ordering battleships after at least the Clemenceau was completed, that the Franco-Soviet Treaty of Mutual Assistance continued and led to the successful creation, testing, and production of the 406mm 50 caliber gun based on the Schneider design, which I'm pretty sure didn't go anywhere, and either the design specifications would have needed to change, or I guess a lot of the staff making those decisions would have had to be replaced. It also kind of assumes that the French don't act like the French, that the Germans choose not to do a few things that some mid-century Germans did, and to a smaller degree that the British, Italians, and Russians have more or less behaved to themselves. So, given the opportunity, there's a pretty good chance that the French would have continued to build battleships, because both the Italians and the Germans ordered more ships after the Scharnhorsts and the first 2 Littorios. The time frame here is pretty tough though, since the French only had 2 slips where a ship like this could be built. One slip used by the Arsenal de Brest to build the Dunkirk, the Richelieu, and where the incomplete Clemenceau would have been built. The only other place to build a ship in France of this size was at Saint-Nazaire, which is where the Jean Bart was kind of built, and the Gascon would have been built after her. And that's exactly why the Germans wanted that port later to service their battleships, if they had ever successfully started running amok in the North Atlantic. After this, everything else kind of falls apart based on conduct. The Franco-Soviet Treaty fell apart just about as fast as things could fall apart in 1936, having never fostered much in the way of cooperation due to the French government, which at this point in history was only slightly more concerned about Germany and/or Italy than the prospects of the French military launching some sort of coup themselves. I think probably more the army, because you can't drive a boat into Paris, but anyway, add to that, building and testing a 16-inch gun isn't as straightforward as scaling up a Chauchat and hoping for the best. It's hard to say if this gun would even have been ready by the time the ship was nearing completion, because it tends to take several years. And I mentioned you'd have to change the specifications for this ship. There are 2 big reasons why 16-inch guns weren't considered for the Richelieu class. First, they wanted a main battery of 8 or 9 guns, and the French couldn't quite figure out a way to do that inside treaty weight. And the second is the French already had 3 capital ship main battery calibers in service. Most major navies had no more than 2, so 4 was probably going to be a logistical mess. And of course, for any of this to matter, Germany would have had to not invade France in 1940 and then the Soviet Union in 1941, which even put a halt to the development of the Sovietsky Soyuz guns. So anyway, that's all I have going on here, and it's the best I can do. So the Champagne in World Warships Legends is a lot like you might expect. What does that mean? Well, it's a lot like the Gascon, and just like I said in my Gascon video, I'm not necessarily the greatest person to review this ship. And I'll put that forward right at the beginning because if anything, I don't want to mislead you. But the Champagne is kind of what you would expect based on that. She's a backline sniper with big caliber guns. And the advantages you have here are you have 16-inch guns, and the number of targets you'll shoot at that are more impressed, let's say, by a 16-inch gun versus a 15-inch gun is pretty noticeable. This comes specifically in the number of cruisers that you can just annihilate, and do so at a much wider range of angles. To aid to that devastation is the relatively good dispersion that you get with this ship. I'd say that this is more noticeable starting at least 12 kilometers. Then, of course, the ship's fast. There are advantages here, particularly when you're tugging around this kind of firepower, but there are some more thoughts on that later. The unfortunate thing with this ship is you have big, accurate guns, but you only have 6 of them, and they are a bit uncomfortable to get all on target. The more that you open yourself up to using the guns, the more you're going to be exposing your pretty limited number of hit points and your light armor scheme. In short, the layout here encourages you to expose yourself, and if you do, you don't have the armor to defeat the shells, and when you do take damage, you don't have a lot of hit points to absorb the damage. Sadly, this ends up leaving you with a difficult choice at the beginning of every match, which is, do I take the hit to my pride and start backing up, or crank the rudder full over, throw on the gas, and pray? This is usually what I do, because I'm trying to be a good example. So, every so often you're going to have a bad game, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it. Also, legendary ships are going to be a bad time. So the folks who are going to like this ship are probably going to be people who play the ultra long-range gun battles with other battleships. She does play basically like the Gascon, just with more punchy guns and a bit better long-range accuracy. I'm not exactly sure why you'd need both this ship and the Gascon, but if you're really into this, it could offer you a little bit of flavor, because in a way this is kind of like the Gascon turned up to 11. As we come to commanders, I'll start first with the base commander, Louis Dufournet. Since you're more likely to reduce your sea detectability with him, this does make turning out a little bit more doable on most maps. You also can pick up Warships, throw on a flag, and maybe use Geprat as an inspiration, and have an absurd amount of speed, particularly in a battleship. That's a little bit more of a meme thing, but it's also fun to get this thing up to just about 41 knots. You can also kind of split the difference in the survivability offered by the two other commanders by going with fully packed. This works great until you need will to rebuild, but as a backline sniper, the chances that somebody's right next to you seem to be a little bit lower. All in all, I'd consider him fit for fooling around a bit, and maybe not super competitive, but in my opinion, he's actually not bad. The other two commanders both have access to a skill called Megalomania. It's always an interesting option, but you need to consider that if you choose this option, on this ship you will start with a tier 7 battleship with less than 50,000 hit points. With French armor, it's not a great idea, I don't recommend it, but I did try it, and you can get your reload down to about 20 seconds. Let's just say at best it was funny, but not a good idea. So, the accuracy commander for the French lineup is Jujard. As you would expect, he will grant you the best options for increasing your range, damage, and the accuracy of your guns. Probably the most important thing is going to be range, and it's actually because of your HP and armor situation. Sitting super far away and trying to land your hits consistently where the enemy cannot answer your shots, or at least it becomes difficult or inconvenient for them to do so, is one way to preserve your life. The thing is, the more you want to juice your guns, the more sluggish the Champagne becomes, but to be fair, in this case, I'd say that she has plenty of mobility to spare, and maybe other than when the CV was focusing me, thank you by the way, I didn't mind the reduction in mobility that much. The real problem I always have with Jujard is you get basically the survivability that you start with, and in this case it's just not very good. The other dedicated battleship commander here is Geprat. The issue you usually run into when running a survivability build on this kind of ship is French accuracy is not really exceptional. The Champagne certainly seems to be considerably more reliable than the Richelieu, Jean Bart and Gascon, particularly at long range, so taking Guprat on this doesn't seem to hurt you quite as much. You can judge that in a few minutes though, because I'll be featuring a game with him on there. That actually really pleases me because the increase in survivability that you get here does seem a lot greater than the comparative accuracy bonus and damage boost that you get with Jujard. And where Jujard makes you slower and less maneuverable in general, Guprat throws a little more speed onto this ship, which is as unnecessary as it is fun. The only downside to this is that you'll have to engage at closer ranges, which will make taking damage more a part of your daily life, particularly from spicy HE cruisers, since you're more likely to be in their range. Coming to stats, we'll be talking about this ship versus the field mostly, and as always, the stats that you're going to see here are base stats with the exception of concealment, which does include the Champagne's camo. As we come to survivability, this is not going to be a strong suit for the Champagne. You have the least amount of hit points of any tier 7 battleship in the game right now, a full 12,500 less than average, and 1,300 less than the Monarch, which was the previous holder of that title. When we look at the armor scheme of this, there's really about two things that I can impress upon you. One is that the outer shell of this looks very similar to any other French battleship. It has 32mm everywhere. 32mm is an inconvenient amount of armor because basically all German HE, all cruisers with equilibrium of power, and all heavy cruisers can penetrate this with HE. It's actually also all of the armor that the Yamato is going to completely ignore. Once you get inside this ship, you actually have a multi-layered arrangement of armor, which is very similar to what you'll find on the Richelieu. Unfortunately, this is kind of like the Richelieu Light, where normally the Richelieu has fairly troll armor because it has a 330mm belt. You only get 240. Where the Richelieu has a turtleback that's 40mm, you have a turtleback that's 30mm. Neither of them are particularly well angled, but the extra 10mm is certainly helpful. Against plunging fire, we're basically looking at plunging through the 32mm deck. You have 170mm or possibly slightly less on the casemate layer, and then anything that hits the top of your citadel is probably going to go ahead and go through because there's only 50mm there. While this can be troll, you're going to tend to take a lot more damage in this ship than you'll ever take in a Richelieu, and Jean Bart or Gascon, and you have noticeably fewer hit points in terms of actually absorbing that damage with a fairly middling torpedo defense, which also is not going to help with the HP situation. For artillery, you have 3 16-inch guns mounted in one turret forward and one aft. This range is a respectable 17.5 kilometers, which means only the Iowa and Richelieu herself start with a better base range at tier 7. Your 28.6 second reload is the fastest among the 16-inch battleships here, though if you're timing your shot against another battleship with smaller guns, most of those are going to be faster than you. The 25.7 second turret traverse is best in class. Your HE damage is 6,100 and you have a 49% fire chance per shell. That fire chance may be intimidating because it looks like a big number, but because you have the smallest number of main battery of any battleship at tier 7, you're actually kind of on the low side of average as a fire starter. It also results in the lowest HE DPM at the tier, and thanks to this relatively low 12,100 damage on your AP shells, also the lowest AP damage per minute. You do have a really impressive secondary battery, but I would liken this to having really good credit and so much money that you'd almost never want to take a loan. Reason for this is if you put the survivability of this ship next to the damage per minute, even with good accuracy, this ship trades fairly poorly. Though you can bounce 16-inch shells off your bow, probably no one playing this ship is going to enjoy getting 3 shells out there every 25 seconds or so, since every ship you'll be facing will probably be answering with at least 4, probably 6, and maybe upwards of 8 guns. So what kind of angles do you need to present to fire both turrets accurately forward? The short answer is probably angles where you're not likely to survive for very long. Firing over your shoulder, you can much more easily kite at near safe angles. This leads necessarily to playing this ship from the back or the side, at distances where your usefulness is, at the very least, dubious. when it comes to map control. When people start to engage you, you can turn in, but you'd probably rather turn out. And the truth of the matter is that you always probably are going to want to be about 2/3 of the way into doing that at any given time. We'll come to the rest when we get to speed. But first, let's talk about your AA suite. I'm a little hesitant to say too much about this because the patch just changed how AA works, but I wouldn't call it good AA. Its rating here seems to be pretty in the middle, and it seems to owe that decent rating to being able to have all of its DPM on the board by 3 kilometers. But it does actually have relatively low DPM overall, and I found I usually used fighter planes to try to discourage the fun police from issuing me tickets, which is still not incredible, but the accuracy seemed to hold up in spite of that choice. When we come to maneuverability, there's a lot of good news here, but I still have some thoughts. So first, the 34 knots here is fast. In fact, it's the fastest battleship there is in the game today. I'd be happy to hit 34 knots in most of my cruisers, and most of those don't even have speed boost. For various reasons, you're probably going to go even faster than that. Our turning circle here is 850, which is close to average, and the rudder shift is also a little below average at just 15.5 knots. The Champagne is excellent at getting around the battlefield, and that can make up for the fact that you typically find yourself too far away from caps to really contest them when you're needed. What I do find a little dubious about having this in a lot of games is that your chances of flanking are relatively low on some maps, and sitting at extreme range or kiting, sometimes having all of this speed is kind of pointless at best, and can very easily get you into trouble accidentally if you're not paying attention. Theoretically. When I come to concealment, I will mention that if the concealment mod were ever available on this ship, I would definitely change out for that. Until then, this ship sports very average concealability from air and sea, and slightly worse concealment than average when shooting its main battery, which is hardly surprising considering that they are 16-inch guns. As we come to consumables, the Champagne features a slightly better than French array of stuff that you can use on this ship. Naturally, you have your normal damage control. You also come with a quick use heal. This does restore a standard amount of hit points, but it comes with just a 40-second recharge timer, which is nice. Your third slot is going to be a choice between enhanced secondary targeting, a spotter plane, or a catapult fighter. I would probably ditch the secondary consumable because, though you can run down destroyers, I don't think you really want to lean into that for several reasons. The most important of which might be that you're probably going to get more use out of either aircraft. I started out with the spotter, and honestly, it's a bit hard to tell the difference. The nice thing about the Champagne's reload is that at least you get 2 bites at the apple before the plane is recalled. What I found was that the catapult fighter at least made airplanes pay a little heavier price for striking me. Also, since just about every battleship has an air detectability of 18 to 20 kilometers while firing right now, having one of these up can actually reveal the odd battleship at ranges where you want to engage him, even if there isn't a CV in the game. Finally, we come to the speed boost. This is the same speed boost that you'll find on other French battleships, which is basically your standard DD speed boost with an extra minute of magic included. Alright, so we gotta get this done, right? We're jumping into the battle. We're gonna be on estuary. I'll go ahead and put my commander up on the screen. As promised, you're looking at Emile Gaprat. I am using, I guess, what you would call my standard 2 battleship commander inspirations because I like all of the things that they do for me. The one thing that I will mention is that you will see that extra AA in slot 1. I feel like that worked pretty well in this case. Also, not using Brawler specifically because you don't want to get really that close to everybody in this. Porcupine is not a great option. And naturally, the first thing we're going to do is try to turn out. We do a decent job of that, but of course you see all of those shells basically hit in my superstructure. We still take a pretty decent amount of damage, and already we're down to 38,000 hit points. That's kind of the story of this ship. I would not say that this is a particularly good start to how I usually like to play, or a particularly bad start for what I was trying to accomplish in this ship. It is the primary reason why I would like an extra 10% concealment in this, because I just don't want to give myself up that early in the game, and I feel like I might be able to get through most of that turn without that. One thing that you may notice occasionally is that I may or may not struggle to hit things at range. Those of you who follow my channel consistently know that I like to get in people's faces. So practice with shooting people at ranges above 15 kilometers is few and far between for me, because it's just not what I do. In any case, at this range, we do manage to land 5 of our 6 shells. I wouldn't say take that as a great indication of what's going to happen every time, but once again, I will encourage you to look at this ship without any sort of real significant accuracy boosts and ask yourself, how do you think this is performing at long range? Do you really need an accuracy commander on this ship? My general feelings were no. Part of it might be because I can't hit anything. The other part is maybe the accuracy of the ship is good enough that maybe it's just not necessary. In any case, our initial thoughts were we were going to come out here and try to play the flanking game. We've got that Bismarck way out there, and he's kind of also playing the flanking game. The thing is, I'm not that much faster than the Bismarck, so it's not like just because you can hit, in this case I think I can hit like 36 knots, maybe 35 and change without hitting the speed boost, but it's not exactly as though you're so fast that you're definitely going to get out in front of people if they really run for the flank. Also, the turn I'm in right now is scary times. If that Richelieu decides to shoot at the side of me, probably like in the last 5 seconds, I'd have been in a lot of trouble. We do manage to get around enough that we really only take 1 penetration there. I think we did manage 1 or 2 bounces too. When I'm talking about the outer shell of this thing, you can bounce 15 and 16 inch guns. It's a little tricky at the tier you're at because most of the 16-inch guns have improved gun angles because most of the 16-inch shells are American. You also have the Bismarck, which has improved shell angles. So even some 15-inch shells have weird penetrations. So it's kind of an interesting place to be for the Champagne. Because you can get the bounces, but you can kind of get wrecked at any time, at any angle, at any range. Just depends on what's shooting at you. And in this particular match, I'm not playing against legendaries. Legendaries are kind of scary right now because it's probably going to be the Yamato or the Conqueror, and the Yamato is going to shoot you with AP, and it won't care, and the Conqueror is going to shoot you with HE, and it won't care. So my French guy told me probably good things. I did a good amount of damage on that York. We're continuing to try to maintain this angle. You can see just about how far I can rotate my guns around. I've got a little bit of room still behind where I'm aiming to maybe turn a little bit more in on the York, but there's no real reason to, because the York can't penetrate me with AP at this angle anyway. Besides, he's going to shoot HE. And I'm a little bit more concerned about the guys behind me, the battleships, because they can do a lot more to me. We're at a pretty good angle against them. That was an unfortunate shot because I really should have waited an extra second or two for him to kind of reveal himself again. I think I I kind of was like, no, he can't get away, and then flubbed my shot. He survives with just a sliver. That's too bad. At this point, I'm considering not shooting at this Richelieu because you can see he is inside my sea detectability. At least he was until he stopped shooting at things. And he was outside of my base sea detectability, which was kind of nice. I could make my turn all right. Somebody's got to deal with that York. And I'm just sitting there really, really upset that that guy got away. So the Richelieu is living up to stereotypes. We're going to go ahead and put some shells out there. He's starting to give me a nice juicy broadside. We'll see if we can't make these 16-inch shells really hurt him. But you can also see I can only get one gun at the angle I'm at right now. Over my shoulder I could get probably both of them. And then maybe have a little extra wiggle room. Forward, the angles aren't quite as good, which is why I suggest that ideally you turn out. If you are getting into that situation where you need to make a decision, turning out is a little bit safer. Plus, you're not driving so close that you start getting HE spammed and all the other terrible things that can happen close in. That said, just like my Gascon video, I am ending up a lot closer to the enemy than I initially had planned to do. You can see that I've activated my engine boost. I think it was just to get around this island. I kind of wanted to get that kill on that guy. We put a couple really nice shells out on that Richelieu. You can see the punchy 16-inch guns were able to citadel a relatively well-armored battleship. That tends to be a little bit troll because of that downward sloped belt and also the turtleback. In any case, you can see he answers pretty easily, and I've taken a pretty good chunk of damage there. But we're up to 99,000. If you were to ask me what Richelieu class ship I like the secondaries on most, I would say this ship. It's also the ship that I would desperately want to use the secondaries the least. The two super firing forward secondary turrets there are really sexy. Unfortunately, they do tend to get knocked out pretty easily. And by the time that you are using them, you're probably in a bad spot. Can be used, and definitely have been used, to run down destroyers. I'm going to say a short prayer to JC here to see if I don't flub this. And I do. That doesn't work. We managed to still burn him to death, but we did not successfully execute a drive-by because I was a little worried about he has a lot better armor than I do. And I didn't want him shooting into my citadel because 2 shells at that range is not a lot, and that's all it would take. Once again, this is just gamesmanship, I guess you would call it. I'm not going to shoot at them until I know I can get this cap. As you can see, we counted it down so that the shell flight time was considerably less than what it would take him to return fire to me, so we were guaranteed basically to get the cap. At this point, it didn't occur to me, but there are a lot of French battleships in this game. At this point, I'm shooting at yet another Richelieu. It looks like there is another one behind it in exceptionally patriotic Union Jack camouflage. So kudos to you, friend. I'm sure there's somebody who's not happy about that. And then the game ends. So anyway, that ends up being a victory on points. Obviously, you can imagine what I was going to do if they gave me plenty of extra time to just shoot at them, just rack up that damage. And at that range, Champagne functions really, really well. In terms of closing thoughts on the Champagne, this one isn't for everyone. I don't feel bad about getting this ship for just 2,500 doubloons, but then I have a lot of doubloons, and I think I'm doing it just as much for all the other stuff that you get in a campaign. As for the Champagne herself, as the French might say, I did not feel quite the same level of ennui in this ship as the Gascon, but I think it might have been because the ship just doesn't have enough hit points for you to allow yourself to become bored. And to be perfectly honest, Mark does say that I like to play kind of bad ships. So that might be what's happening here. Anyway, it is another backliner with a little bit more mobility baked in too. And well, I'm not an exceptional shot beyond 15 kilometers, in part again because I don't have a lot of experience there. And then of course there might be some beverage interaction, but with your really low rate of fire, I do think the poor DPM is kind of a bummer. It does make it hard for you to actually really carry a game. But if you're a better shot and you like the damage farming stuff from the back, you could have a lot better results than me quite easily. In any case, this video is long enough already. I think I've said enough about this ship. I hope you guys have enjoyed this review. And as always, see you guys on the next one.